He held the Camaro keys like they were his, didn't even flinch when he told the dealer, "Yeah, my grandfather's not well anymore. Signed it all over to me last month." I was watching from across the street and sitting in Frank's car, engine off, voice recorder rolling. Tyler had no idea the buyer he was meeting was a retired detective, or that the titles in his backpack were fakes my lawyer and I had cooked up just for this moment. He thought he was about to sell off my life's work, 5 decades of sweat and steel, for pennies. But the second he handed over that forged paperwork, the trap slammed shut, and the look on his face when Frank's partner flipped his badge, that's the image I play in my mind every time I walk through the museum and see my daughter's name on the plaque where his should have been. He tried to sell my legacy. Instead, I made him the warning story at every family gathering. Stick around, subscribe, because I'm going to tell you exactly how I caught him, what I did next, and why some betrayals don't deserve handcuffs. They deserve spotlights. My name's Robert Mitchell. I'm 74 years old, and I've spent my life with a wrench in one hand and a sandblaster in the other. I wasn't a collector of status. I was a restorer, a builder, a caretaker of old beauty. Every Saturday and Sunday for over 50 years, I worked in my garage, restoring old American muscle from the bones up. A '67 Mustang I found in a junkyard, rusted through. A '70 Chevelle. My wife used to race me in before the kids came. A '69 Camaro I pulled out of a barn with 3 flat tires and a squirrel's nest in the glove box. Those cars weren't just steel and paint. They were chapters. They saw me through the loss of my wife, through retirement, through long winters when the house felt too quiet and the days too short. And Tyler? He was supposed to carry that story forward. He was 16 when I first let him get under the hood. I taught him how to gap spark plugs, rebuild carburetors, and mix paint by eye. He called it our secret shop. Used to say he couldn't wait to own them all one day. I believed him. I thought I was giving him more than just property. I thought I was handing down purpose, legacy, something you couldn't buy or fake. He'd walk around the garage and touch each car like they were sacred. And maybe that's the hardest part, because he knew what they meant to me, which means he knew precisely what he was trying to steal. Have you ever trusted someone so profoundly that you handed them the keys to your life and only realized too late they weren't planning to drive it, sell it off piece by piece? The first time Tyler asked to borrow money, it was for something small. "Books," he said, "college materials." He sounded sheepish, grateful. I wrote the check without blinking. The second time? A semester abroad. "It'll look good on a resume, Grandpa." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my grandson, the kid who helped me rebuild a transmission with hands that weren't strong yet, but were steady. The one who cried when the Camaro first turned over and revved clean. But the requests got bigger, more vague. And then one spring afternoon, he came to me with what he called a business opportunity. Said he needed to borrow a few of the car titles. Just temporarily, he promised, so he could use them as collateral on some tech investment with friends. Some app they were working on. He was animated, slick, too slick. He'd never talked like that before. Corporate lingo. Fast-talking gloss with no real detail underneath. I asked questions. He dodged. That night, I sat in the garage with the Mustang's hood open, just staring at the engine block. And I felt it in my gut. Something was off. So I called Frank, my neighbor of 20 years, retired cop, sharp instincts, knows a lie the second it's spoken. I said, "Look into Tyler for me," quietly. 3 days later, Frank knocked on my back door and said, "You're gonna want to sit down." Tyler didn't want to take on collateral for a startup. He had an $80,000 gambling problem, sports betting, online and off. He'd been in deep for 2 years. The bookie was threatening to escalate. And Tyler? Tyler had already visited 3 different vintage car dealers, told them he owned my collection, showed them fake documents, paperwork claiming I'd signed over the titles due to declining mental health, even claimed I was too senile to handle my affairs. And he had buyers lined up. Cash offers are ready to go. All he needed was access to those titles. He wasn't asking. He was preparing to gut 50 years of work, to pawn off the only real legacy I had left, to turn the heart of my garage into hush money for a debt he dug himself into. That kind of betrayal doesn't come with yelling. It comes with silence. A slow, hollow ache that settles in your chest like cement. What do you do when the person you raised to carry your legacy turns out to be the one scheming to bury it instead? Frank slid a manila folder across my kitchen table. He didn't say a word at first, just looked at me with the kind of expression a cop saves for bad news. I opened it. The first page was a forged power of attorney. My signature, crooked, shaky, not mine, under a line that read, "Due to declining mental health, Robert Mitchell transfers full legal authority to Tyler Mitchell." It felt like being punched in the chest. I turned the page. Emails. Printed text. Tyler told a dealer that I wasn't fully aware of my surroundings anymore, that he'd been running the restorations for years, that the titles were ready to go once the paperwork clears. There were dates, meeting times, a list of cars he planned to unload first, my Camaro at the top for barely half its value. I kept flipping. A photo of Tyler outside a dealership grinning, shaking hands with a potential buyer. Another email. "I can move the Mustang and Chevelle fast. My grandfather won't put up a fight." The room swayed a little. I wasn't angry yet. Anger takes muscle. This was something more profound, something quieter, a kind of heartbreak that doesn't shout, it just breaks. I thought about the years I'd spent showing him how to torque bolts, how to feel for misfires with just a hand on the fender. I thought about how his face lit up when we pulled the cover off the Camaro after its first complete restoration. I thought about my wife, his grandmother, who used to say, "These cars will outlive us. Make sure they go to someone who loves them." And now? He was willing to trade them away like poker chips, sell them off to cover a mistake he made, lie about my health, rewrite my entire life into a weakness he could exploit, not because he needed help, because he wanted to escape. He didn't think I'd understand. He didn't think I'd notice. He didn't think I mattered enough to check. Frank finally spoke. "You okay?" I stared at the forged signature for a long moment before answering. "Yeah," I said softly. "I'm done being fooled." Because in that moment, the truth settled in. Tyler didn't just betray my trust. He buried it, walked over it, and expected me to hand him the shovel. But if he was willing to pretend I was losing my mind, then maybe it was time he saw what a man with all his wits can do. Have you ever looked at proof, undeniable proof, that someone you love has been carving you out of your own life behind your back? I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the garage with the lights off, surrounded by the very machines Tyler had tried to gut from under me. Each one had a story. The Mustang, my first complete restoration. The Chevelle, my wife's favorite. The Camaro, the one Tyler and I rebuilt together. And I realized something. He didn't just try to steal them, he tried to erase the story they told. That's when the anger finally came. Not loud, not violent, just a firm, cold clarity. If Tyler was bold enough to forge my signature, lie to dealers, and weaponize family trust, then I was going to be twice as bold, but smart, measured. I didn't want retribution. I wanted a lesson, the kind you feel in your bones every time you drive past a missed future you chose to burn. So I picked up the phone and called Frank again. "Let's build him the perfect stage," I said. And Frank, God bless him, didn't flinch. We spent the next week planning it down to the bolt. I called my attorney, Jeff Perkins, old school guy, loyal, sharp, told him what Tyler had done. Told him I needed two things. One, a fake transfer of ownership that looked real enough to fool Tyler. Two, a false meeting set up with a buyer who wasn't really in the market, but was definitely in law enforcement. Jeff nodded slowly, then said, "So we're not pressing charges?" "No," I said. "I'm giving him something worse." We drafted the documents, even built in a fake clause suggesting I was signing due to early-stage cognitive decline, just to let Tyler believe his lie had worked. Frank called his old partner Ray. Retired like him, now working freelance investigations, Ray would play the buyer. The deal was this. Tyler would come to Ray's garage, briefcase in hand, titles ready. He'd present his fake power of attorney. He'd try to close the sale, and the moment money was mentioned, boom. Ray would flash the badge, not to arrest, but to show Tyler just how exposed he'd become. No shouting, no courtrooms, just silence and shame. It wasn't about the law anymore. It was about drawing a clean line in oil and rust and history and telling him, "You crossed it." I wasn't just his grandfather now. I was the man reminding him what happens when you try to sell a legacy that doesn't belong to you. Have you ever decided that the best revenge isn't punishment, but teaching someone exactly what they almost had and will never touch again? The fake papers looked good. Too good. Jeff printed them on the same parchment we used for the trust updates years ago. Replicated my old signature, shakier now, but still mine. Even included a notarized stamp. The details were surgical. Tyler never questioned them. I told him over lunch, genuine, casual, that I was getting tired of the upkeep. Maybe he was right. Perhaps it was time to pass the collection on while I could still remember the keys. He looked shocked at first, then smug. Not in the smile, Tyler's more brilliant than that, but in the slight lean back in his chair. Like the con had finally landed. He nodded solemnly and said, "Thanks, Grandpa. I'll take care of them." Liar. 3 days later, he set the meet. Said he had a guy lined up to buy 3 of the cars in a package deal, $200K for the Camaro, Chevelle, and the Mustang. Less than half what they were worth. But he needed fast cash, and fast cash smells like desperation. Ray, Frank's ex-partner, cleaned out a corner of his garage, set up a folding table, parked an old Corvette in the background to sell the illusion, printed up a fake purchase agreement, and had a wire hidden in his vest and a badge in his glove box. I told Tyler I'd sign over the remaining documentation that morning, just to make it easy. He thanked me with a pat on the shoulder, didn't even make eye contact. That was the last time I saw him before the sting. Ray told me later how it played out. Tyler showed up right on time, backpack over one shoulder, 3 pink title slips, mine, clipped together with the forged POA on top. He shook Ray's hand and said, "My grandfather's not doing too great these days. Figured we should move fast before he changes his mind." Ray played it cool, asked a few questions, talked numbers, let Tyler hang himself with every detail he thought he'd mastered. And then, just before handing over the deposit, Ray looked him dead in the eyes and said, "Do you really think you're the first spoiled kid who tried to sell what wasn't his?" Then he pulled the badge. The color drained from Tyler's face. He tried to backtrack and said it was a misunderstanding that I'd permitted him, that he could call me, clear it all up. Ray smiled. "We've already spoken." That's when it sank in. The car titles weren't real. The buyer was a cop. The whole deal was a setup. And the man he thought was losing his mind had played him to the edge of a federal charge. They let him walk. No arrest. No handcuffs. Just shame. And the quiet realization that his empire of lies had collapsed in a single conversation. Have you ever watched someone realize too late that they were never in control, and that every step they took was down a path you laid for them? Tyler didn't come home that night, didn't call, didn't text. But I didn't need a phone call to know what happened. Ray called me 10 minutes after the meet, voice flat with satisfaction. He cracked, he said. Tried to lie his way out until I showed him your voice recording. We'd staged everything, even my agreement. I'd recorded a message, clean and calm. My name is Robert Mitchell. I am of sound mind. If you're seeing this, it means my grandson, Tyler, tried to sell cars that do not belong to him, under forged authority. He lied about my mental state. He forged my signature, and he tried to profit from my legacy. Ray played that recording in front of him. Watched Tyler's face collapse in on itself like a burning shed. There were witnesses. A second undercover officer was posing as a buyer. A dealership associate who thought it was a legitimate transaction, and Tyler, who thought he could orchestrate a quiet heist, suddenly found himself exposed in surround sound. He wasn't arrested. Ray made sure of that, because jail would have been too clean, too quiet, too forgettable. What we gave Tyler instead was reputation death. Word got out quickly. Frank told his brother-in-law, who said the owner of the local vintage show circuit, who told everyone. Tyler didn't just fail, he failed loudly. Every collector he ever tried to impress now knew precisely what he'd done. He became a whisper at car shows, a warning tale passed between booths, a name collectors would Google and then quietly step away from. He wasn't charged, but he was marked. And I made sure it didn't stop there. I called a family meeting. My kids, their spouses, their kids. I told them everything, showed them the fake POA, showed them the recording, showed them the receipts Tyler would have signed to sell my cars to strangers. And I looked him dead in the eye, sitting 2 chairs down from me, hollow and trembling, and said, "You didn't just try to sell my collection. You tried to sell my mind. You told people I was finished, that I couldn't think straight, that I didn't know what was happening. But I knew. I saw it all. And I gave you one last chance to come clean. You chose theft." The room was dead silent, and I didn't raise my voice once. Because when truth is loud enough, you don't have to. Have you ever watched someone's lie catch fire in public and seen their mask melt in front of everyone they thought would never question them? I didn't press charges, didn't sue, didn't yell. I just signed papers. 2 days after the family meeting, I went to Jeff's office and rewrote everything. The cars, the collection Tyler was supposed to inherit, went to his mother, my daughter, Sarah. Sarah, who used to sit in the garage after school with engine grease on her uniform skirt. Sarah, who never once asked for anything, who never tried to manipulate, never looked at those cars like money, but always like a memory. The paperwork was simple. One line: transfer of collection and ownership to Sarah Mitchell, in full. But what did I do next? That was for me. I contacted the local auto museum, the one just off the interstate, where they display classic American steel for school tours and weekend crowds. They'd been after me for years to loan something from the collection. I always said no. This time, I said yes. I rolled the cars in myself, cleaned them one last time, made sure every surface gleamed, every tire was dressed, every plaque polished. Each car went under her name, not mine, not his. A new exhibit, on loan from the Sarah Mitchell Memorial Collection, restored by Robert Mitchell, 1970, 2020. Her name is on the title. My name is on the work. Tyler's name, nowhere. I didn't need to punish him further, because now, every time he drives past that museum, he sees what could have been his, what he lied to steal, what he disrespected, what he lost, and he can't touch it, can't walk in without facing the staff who all know, can't show his friends or his kids someday without explaining why his name is missing. His inheritance became heritage, but not for him. And when Sarah brought her youngest through the exhibit last month, he pointed at the Camaro and said, "Mom, is this Grandpa's?" She smiled and said, "No, it's ours." Have you ever rewritten a legacy so entirely that the person who tried to steal it is forced to live in its shadow, knowing it was once promised to them, until they prove they didn't deserve it? Sarah visits the museum every month now. She brings her kids, Tyler's cousins, two bright-eyed boys who run between the cars like they're race cars in a dream. She teaches them what I taught her: how to check oil, how to tell a good weld from a lazy one, why vinyl bench seats from the '70s squeak the way they do when the weather turns. She stands beside each car like it's an heirloom, not because it's worth money, but because it carries time. Memory sealed in lacquer and steel. She honors the work, not by speaking big words, but by showing up. And that's what legacy really is. Not what you leave behind, but who picks it up when you're gone. One afternoon, as we stood by the Mustang, her youngest asked, "Did you build this?" I said, "I did, but your mom helped keep it safe." He nodded like that made perfect sense. It did. The family came back into balance, not with fanfare, but with consistency. Dinner on Sundays, cards in the garage, stories that don't have to end in warnings anymore. And then, one day, a letter arrived. No return address, no dramatic opening, just a short note. It was from Tyler. He said he'd gotten help for the gambling, said he was sorry, said he understood why I'd done what I did, said he hoped I could forgive him someday. I didn't respond. Not out of anger, not to twist the knife, but because I don't write letters to people who already got their answer. He sees the cars. He sees the plaque. He hears the silence. And in that silence, there's peace. Not for him, maybe, but for me, for Sarah, for every mile I drove to keep that legacy alive. Have you ever found peace not by reopening the wound, but by sealing it for good? Knowing some silences are louder than any apology? I didn't do what I did to ruin Tyler's life. That would have been easy. A police report, a court case, a judge. It would have been over in 6 months. But 6 months isn't a lesson. A lesson lasts longer. A lesson gets in your rearview mirror and follows you for years. Sometimes, revenge isn't about punishment. It's about placement. About taking something someone tried to steal and putting it somewhere they'll have to see, but never touch, again and again. Tyler drives by that museum every week. He sees the cars, sees the sign, sees the name that isn't his. That's the lesson. Not rage, not destruction, distance. He's not in prison. He's not blocked. But he's removed from the legacy, from the story, from the truth he tried to rewrite in his own image. And in that removal, I found peace. Because legacy, real legacy, doesn't come with bloodlines. It comes with respect. And trust? That's not inherited. It's earned. If you've ever raised someone, mentored someone, poured everything into someone, only to watch them gamble it away for their own ego or survival, don't stay quiet. Don't rationalize it. Don't bury it. Don't hand them the keys to your life, hoping they won't crash it. Sometimes, justice doesn't come with handcuffs. It comes with a signature, a spotlight, and a plaque that says, "You lost this forever." So if you're holding your tongue, waiting for the right moment, let this be it. Speak up. Stand firm. Protect what matters. Because silence may feel safe, but it's not love. Subscribe for more stories like this, where the quiet ones don't stay silent forever. Because some truths, they drive harder than any engine ever built. Have you stayed quiet long enough?